My name is Emily, I'm 24, and I never imagined I would feel this level of betrayal in my own home. One moment, I was laughing with my family, joking about my younger brother's birthday, thinking my parents were on my side. The next, I was in the ICU, hooked to monitors, tubes running into my arms, the steady beep of machines marking each fragile breath. Outside, rain lashed against the window in relentless sheets, casting shadows across the sterile, white walls. I could feel every drop of it echoing the storm inside me. I remember the way my chest tightened as the nurse adjusted my oxygen mask. "Just relax, Emily," she said softly, but her words felt hollow, almost unreal. My mind was spinning, not from the medications or the dizziness, but from the thought that cut deeper than any pain in my body. My parents had left. They had left me here, in this room, when the doctors had warned them that my condition was critical. The doctors had said I might not make it through the night, and yet they chose to go to my brother's party. My brother. The same one who always seemed to get everything he wanted. I tried to focus on the monitor, the small green numbers flickering in rhythm with my heartbeat, but the betrayal was louder than any machine.
How could they leave me?
How could they step out of this room as if my life were secondary, as if their presence here wasn't the difference between hope and despair? I wanted to scream, but my voice felt trapped somewhere deep inside me, stuck behind the tubes and the weakness that had stolen my strength. The rain outside grew heavier, pounding against the glass, as if the sky itself was mourning with me. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to lean in closer, whispering the truth I refused to accept. I was utterly alone. And yet, amidst the beeping alarms and the cold fluorescent light, I found a strange clarity. This wasn't just about me being sick. This was about choices. This was about loyalty. And this was about the people I thought I could trust the most. I thought about my father's voice, always calm, always authoritative, and my mother, who smiled and told me I was strong, even as she coddled my brother in ways I never received. I thought about the party they were attending, the music, the laughter, the balloons, all happening while I fought to stay alive. And I realized something terrifying. I had been invisible to them, a shadow in the corner of my own family's life. The words life-threatening from the doctors weren't just warnings. They were cries for attention, cries that were ignored. I closed my eyes, trying to shut out the machines and the storm and the echo of my parents' absence, but I couldn't. The sense of betrayal clung to me, heavy and suffocating. I remembered the last time my parents looked at me with real concern, the way they used to reassure me when I was a child, the way they used to tell me that family always comes first. Those memories felt like someone else's life, distant and unreachable, replaced now with a cold, unbearable truth. Through the blur of tears and exhaustion, I felt anger rising, a burning, raw kind of anger that made my heart beat faster even as my body faltered. How could they choose a party over my life? How could they walk away knowing that I might not see another sunrise? Every pulse of my weakened heart felt like it was shouting the answer. They never truly saw me, not the way I needed them to. I had been reduced to a patient in a room, a name on a chart, a body to monitor, while my brother's happiness took precedence over my survival. And in that moment, lying on the hospital bed, I made a vow to myself, even before fully understanding how or when I would act on it. I would remember this. Every detail, every choice, every moment of betrayal. Because if they thought leaving me here was the end of my story, they were wrong. If they thought I would simply lie here and accept it, they were wrong. This was the beginning of something much larger, something they would never see coming. I opened my eyes and looked at the door, half expecting them to rush in, to apologize, to realize the gravity of their decision. But the hallway was empty, silent. The machines beeped steadily, the rain continued its relentless rhythm, and a chilling question lingered in the air. How could they choose a party over my life? How could the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally leave me to face the worst night of my life alone? And as the shadows of the room stretched longer, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. This betrayal would not go unanswered. The night stretched on, and I listened to the rhythm of my own heartbeat, counting each beat as if marking time for a reckoning yet to come. I could feel the anger settling into my bones, turning into determination. Every flicker of the monitors, every flash of lightning outside, every raindrop on the window became a reminder of what was lost and what would have to be reclaimed. My parents thought this was the end. They thought the storm inside me was just another moment of weakness. They were wrong. This was the moment that would define everything. And as I drifted into a fitful sleep, I clung to that question one last time, letting it echo through my mind and through the sterile walls around me. How could they choose a party over my life? And more importantly, what would I do now that I had no one left to trust but myself? I grew up in a house that always looked perfect from the outside. My parents, Thomas and Margaret, were the kind of people neighbors admired, successful, polite, and charming. But behind the closed doors, everything was different. I was Emily, the eldest of two, always expected to set an example, to achieve, to obey. And then there was Ryan, my younger brother, 9 years my junior, who seemed to get whatever he wanted simply by smiling at the right moment. I loved him, I truly did, but loving him often meant being invisible, pushed to the sidelines while he basked in attention and approval. From as early as I can remember, there was a pattern. My father would praise Ryan's small accomplishments with a proud grin, while my achievements were often met with a polite nod, as if they were expected rather than earned. My mother, warm and affectionate at first glance, had her favorites too. She showered Ryan with attention, always quick to soothe his minor troubles while expecting me to handle mine alone. I tried not to notice, tried to believe that love was measured in different ways, but even a child can feel the sting of favoritism. School was my escape. I poured myself into academics, into writing, into music, anything that allowed me to create a world where I mattered. I had dreams, big dreams. I wanted to travel, to write stories that touched hearts, to carve out a life that was entirely my own. But at home, every ambition seemed to be weighed against Ryan's comfort. If I spoke too loudly about my plans, my parents would brush me off, reminding me of responsibilities and practicality, as if my desires were frivolous. Ryan, on the other hand, could announce the smallest wish, and suddenly the world shifted to accommodate him. I remember one particular evening when I was 14. I had spent weeks preparing a school recital piece, practicing until my fingers ached, my voice hoarse from endless rehearsals. The night of the performance, my parents barely glanced my way. They were busy helping Ryan with a new video game he had begged for, fussing over him with exaggerated enthusiasm. I sat in the back of the living room, trying to hide my disappointment, my stomach tight with a mixture of sadness and frustration. That night, I learned two things. First, that love could feel conditional, and second, that anger could smolder quietly beneath a polite exterior. Over the years, the favoritism never stopped. Ryan's mischief was excused with laughter. Mine, even when minor, was met with stern lectures. He could stay out late, skip chores, or bend the rules, while I was expected to be perfect in every sense. I tried to talk to my parents about it once or twice, but their words always cut too softly to heal the wound. "Emily, we just want what's best for both of you," my mother would say, her voice calm, almost rehearsed. And somehow, that line became the anthem of my life, a promise that felt hollow, masking the reality that my value was always measured against Ryan's convenience. Despite everything, I loved my family. I clung to moments of warmth, like quiet mornings where my father would let me help him cook, or afternoons when my mother would sit beside me while I sketched, her praise soft but genuine. Those moments were fleeting, like sunlight breaking through storm clouds, but they were enough to keep me hoping that one day, things might be different. I believed in their love, even when it felt like it came with conditions. I believed that family meant protection, loyalty, and unwavering support. Ryan, meanwhile, was oblivious, or perhaps he just didn't care about the imbalance. He was charming, the kind of kid who could make anyone laugh, who could charm teachers, friends, even strangers without effort. People adored him. Parents, relatives, neighbors, he had them all wrapped around his little finger. And I watched, silently, as he grew older, learning to manipulate the family dynamics without even trying. I tried to guide him, to show him empathy and fairness, but he shrugged me off with a grin that hid a cunning side I would later recognize in full. By the time I turned 20, I had learned to navigate the minefield of family life with careful steps. I kept my ambitions close to my chest, my vulnerabilities private. I became observant, noting every glance, every whispered comment, every small act that revealed the real power structures in the house. I knew my parents' favorites, their blind spots, and most importantly, I knew my brother's charm was a tool, wielded skillfully to get what he wanted. I never said it out loud, but the awareness settled into my mind like a shadow. I had to be careful, or I would be erased completely. Still, I allowed myself to believe in family, to trust that when it mattered most, they would be there for me. After all, they were my parents. They had raised me, loved me in fragments, and shaped the person I had become. But that trust, fragile and unwavering, was precisely what Ryan and my parents took for granted. And though I couldn't see it yet, that fragile trust was already cracking, ready to shatter the moment I needed them most. As I lay in the hospital bed, weak and betrayed, I thought back on all those years, on the overlooked achievements, the quiet disappointments, the moments where I had been pushed aside for Ryan's happiness. Every memory was a brushstroke painting the truth. I had been living in a house where love was conditional, where favoritism ruled, and where my voice had always been the quieter one. And now, with the stark reality of my life hanging in the balance, the pattern became undeniable. The same people who had ignored me for years, who had allowed Ryan to be the center of attention, had chosen again, choosing a party over my survival. I clenched my fists and felt a spark ignite inside me, one that had been smoldering for years unnoticed, but now impossible to ignore. That spark was anger, yes, but more importantly, it was awareness. I knew their flaws, their weaknesses, their priorities. And I knew that the next chapter, what I would do, how I would respond, how I would reclaim what was taken from me, was already beginning to right itself. For the first time in my life, I realized that love for my family had always been conditional, that trust could be broken, and that sometimes survival meant relying on no one but yourself. And as I drifted between the hum of monitors and the distant sound of rain, I understood something chilling but true. The person who had been my closest ally, my family, could also be my greatest adversary. I woke in the ICU with the metallic tang of antiseptic in my nose and the persistent hum of machines around me. My body felt heavy, as though the weight of the world had settled on my chest. The fluorescent lights flickered above, casting long, ghostly shadows across the room, but the real darkness was not outside. It was in the empty space where my parents should have been. I had expected panic, urgency, concern. What I found instead was absence. Cold, deliberate absence. The nurse's eyes met mine, calm but clinical, and I realized my parents weren't coming. The thought hit me like a punch to the gut, twisting me inside. Where are they? I croaked, my throat raw from fever and fear. The nurse hesitated, glancing toward the door. They said they needed to be at your brother's party, she murmured, almost apologetically. My blood ran cold.
Party.
My parents had chosen a celebration over my fragile, struggling life. A storm of disbelief and betrayal surged through me, leaving me trembling on the bed, barely able to breathe without choking on shock. I tried to comprehend their choice, to search for some justification, some reason that could make sense. But there was none. Every rational thought dissolved into a fog of hurt and anger. The doctors had warned them. The nurses had reminded them. My life teetered on a knife's edge, and they had left. I could almost hear my father's smooth, practiced explanations. Emily, we have responsibilities. Ryan's happiness is important too. And my mother, her voice usually so comforting, could be imagined offering the same hollow excuse. But hearing their words in my mind only deepened the betrayal, each syllable echoing like a lie I'd been forced to swallow for years. I stared at the monitors, the blinking numbers and steady beeps marking each fragile heartbeat, each shallow breath I fought to take. I felt small, diminished, erased. How could they leave me like this? How could the people who were supposed to protect me, love me, ensure I survived, treat me like I was expendable? I thought back to the countless times I had been overlooked, the small moments that had piled up into this mountain of neglect, the ignored school achievements, the whispered favoritism, the way Ryan had always been allowed to bend the rules while I followed them to the letter. It all made sense now, painfully, horrifically. I had never mattered as much as I thought I did. Tears blurred my vision, and I wanted to scream, to rage against the injustice, but the tubes in my arms made even movement painful. My body, so fragile, was betraying me, but worse, my family had betrayed me first. I could almost see their smiles in my mind, mingling with the music, the laughter, and the balloons, completely oblivious, or perhaps completely indifferent, to my struggle. Every memory of their so-called care became a lie. Every gentle word I had once believed was sincere now rang hollow. They had chosen someone else over me, and that realization burned hotter than fever. I thought about Ryan, unaware of the crisis, probably laughing at the party, surrounded by friends and family who had prioritized his happiness above my survival. I remembered the way my parents had always excused his behavior, celebrated his charm, and elevated him above me. And now, even in the most critical moment of my life, nothing had changed. Nothing. I was alone, utterly alone, in a place where every breath was a battle and every heartbeat a reminder of their absence. My mind oscillated between disbelief and fury. How could they leave a daughter, someone who had loved, obeyed, and tried to please them, behind? Were they blind to the severity of my condition? Or was this just another proof of the hierarchy they had always maintained in our home? Perhaps in their eyes, my struggle was insignificant. Perhaps my pain was simply an inconvenient backdrop to the life they deemed important. My brother's party, the celebration of someone else's happiness at my expense. The realization hit harder with each passing second. The anger inside me grew, like a fire threatening to consume the frailty of my body. I clenched my fists beneath the thin hospital sheets, imagining confronting them, demanding answers, forcing them to face what they had done. But I was too weak, too fragile, yet somehow, in that weakness, clarity emerged. The betrayal was absolute, undeniable, and irreversible. There would be no apologies, no sudden change of heart. They had revealed themselves entirely, stripped away the illusion of care and love, and left me to face the consequences of their choices. And then, amidst the beeping monitors and the soft hiss of the oxygen machine, I felt something else, something I hadn't allowed myself to feel before: awareness. I understood, with painful precision, that this moment was pivotal. This abandonment was not just a moment of absence. It was a statement, a definition of who I was to them, and who I could never be. Their priorities, their values had been laid bare. I could no longer cling to hope that they would act in my favor, that love alone would save me. I had to see the truth, cold and unyielding, in all its clarity. And yet, in the midst of despair, there was a spark, a tiny, almost imperceptible glimmer of resolve, igniting inside me. If they believed this betrayal would break me completely, they were gravely mistaken. I could feel it stirring, quiet but insistent, a determination that would not be silenced by sickness, by fear, or by their absence. I would survive this, not for them, not because they cared, but for myself. And when the time came, I would make sure they understood exactly what it meant to leave someone they claimed to love at the edge of death. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the rhythm of my own heartbeat steady me, focusing on the anger and hurt that coursed like electricity through my veins. I replayed the scene over and over in my mind, the empty chairs, the sterile lights, the way the nurse's hesitant glance had confirmed the unthinkable. And beneath the fear, beneath the despair, I made a vow, quiet but unwavering. This was not the end of my story. Not yet. And when it was over, when I had the strength and the opportunity, they would see me, not as a patient, not as an afterthought, but as someone they had underestimated at their own peril. The rain outside battered the window like the steady march of time, and I realized that every second they spent celebrating, ignoring my struggle, only fueled the fire within me. I didn't know exactly how or when, but one truth had crystallized clearly. I would not be forgotten. I would not be dismissed. And as I lay in the quiet hum of the ICU, a chilling question formed in my mind, sharp and unyielding. Was this the end or the beginning? The storm outside had not let up. Rain hammered against the hospital window, each drop a drumbeat echoing the turmoil in my chest. I lay there, connected to machines that kept me alive, feeling every throb of my body as though it carried the weight of the world. My parents were gone. Ryan was at a party.
And
I was alone in the room where life and betrayal collided, where the very people I trusted had chosen everything else over me. Grief washed over me first, heavy and relentless. It wasn't just the fear of dying. It was the realization that the people I loved could abandon me so easily. My throat tightened, and I tried to swallow the lump that had formed. Each shallow breath felt like a betrayal in itself, a reminder that I was fragile and human, that my parents' absence had left a void wider than any hospital bed. I thought of all the nights I had cried quietly, trying to earn approval that never truly came, of every time Ryan's needs had eclipsed mine. The pattern was undeniable, and now it had led to this moment, this stark, unyielding loneliness. Anger followed grief, hot and sharp, cutting through my haze of fear. I clenched my fists beneath the thin sheets, feeling the skin of my knuckles stretch and ache. How could they leave me when I was fighting to live? How could they prioritize balloons, laughter, and cake over my heartbeat, over the possibility that I might not survive? Rage ignited in me, a furious spark that refused to be smothered by weakness or illness. I imagined confronting them, holding them accountable for every instance of favoritism, every time they had neglected me for Ryan's sake. My mind raced with visions of the words I would say, the questions I would demand answers to. But anger alone was not enough. Confusion gnawed at me too, twisting like a knife in my chest. I tried to reconcile the image of the parents I had loved, the voices that had comforted me, the hands that had guided me, with the cold, calculated absence I now faced. Did they not care? Had they ever truly cared? The questions spiraled endlessly, answers eluding me at every turn. And as I lay there, the hum of machines marking my fragile heartbeat, I realized that my trust, the trust one had clung to so desperately, had been shattered entirely. Memories came unbidden, vivid and cruel. I remembered my 16th birthday, how Ryan had thrown a tantrum because he hadn't gotten the gift he wanted, and my parents had appeased him immediately, leaving me to feel invisible in my own celebration. I remembered my piano recital, where I had poured every ounce of passion into the performance, only to have my parents applaud politely before turning their attention back to Ryan's minor achievements. I remembered the family dinners, the quiet evenings, the endless lessons that I must be patient, understanding, and selfless, always putting Ryan first. Each memory cut deeper now, forming a tapestry of neglect and favoritism that had been stitched long before this ICU night. I tried to sleep, but rest eluded me. Every creak of the bed, every hiss of the oxygen machine, reminded me of my vulnerability. The room felt colder than it should have, the sterile white walls pressing in as if to emphasize the emptiness my parents had left behind. In those quiet moments, I let myself imagine their excuses. My father, always the rational one, perhaps telling himself that Ryan's happiness was more immediate, more tangible. My mother, the gentle one, convincing herself that I was strong enough to endure, that leaving me for a few hours wouldn't hurt me. And yet, none of it mattered. Excuses could not undo the betrayal, could not fill the absence where love should have been. I drifted into a half-conscious state, and the line between reality and memory blurred. I could see myself at 10, crying because I had been scolded for something minor while Ryan's antics were met with laughter. I could see myself at 15, hiding in my room, heart aching, while my parents fussed over Ryan's homework, praised his drawings, celebrated his smallest victories. And now, at 24, in a hospital bed, I realized the pattern had never been accidental. I had been conditioned to be quiet, to be compliant, to accept second place. And in that realization, a dangerous seed took root. The idea that I could no longer wait for love, care, or recognition from the people who had consistently failed me. The anger and grief slowly evolved into something more focused, more deliberate. It was not just survival anymore, it was awareness. I began to notice details I had ignored in the past. The way my parents flinched when confronted, the subtle manipulations Ryan had always used to bend the family's attention to him, the small but repeated ways my own voice had been minimized. And with each observation, a quiet determination built within me. If they could abandon me when I was weakest, then I could no longer rely on them. If they thought neglect would keep me powerless, they were mistaken. In that long, sleepless night, I let myself imagine what it would be like to reclaim control, to take back the agency that had been denied to me for so long. I envisioned myself standing strong, unshakable, a force they could not ignore. I imagined moments where I confronted Ryan, exposed the favoritism, and demanded acknowledgement for every slight I had endured. And most importantly, I imagined my parents seeing the consequence of their choices, feeling the impact of their abandonment in a way they had never considered. Even amidst the haze of pain and exhaustion, the thought gave me clarity. I realized that my anger, my grief, and my confusion were not just reactions. They were tools, guiding me toward the person I needed to become. I understood for the first time that survival was not enough. I had to rise from the shadow of neglect and favoritism to transform the fury and heartbreak into purpose and strength. That purpose, faint but undeniable, began to outline the shape of what would come next. I sat up slightly in the hospital bed, feeling the monitors beep in steady rhythm, and let my mind wander through the possibilities. Every memory of betrayal, every moment of being overlooked became a fuel that stoked a growing fire within me. I thought about strategies, about patience, about the subtle ways I could reclaim what had been denied. Revenge was not yet a plan, it was a glimmer, a seed planted in fertile ground, waiting for the right moment to grow. As dawn approached, the rain outside slowing to a gentle drizzle, I closed my eyes and let the quiet determination settle in my chest. The heartbreak, the despair, the rage, they were all part of the transformation. And as I drifted into an uneasy rest, one thought circled relentlessly in my mind. I had been abandoned, betrayed, and underestimated. But no longer. I would not be ignored. I would not be powerless. And though the storm outside had eased, the storm inside me was only beginning to rise. I lay in the hospital bed for hours after that first night, watching the ceiling and cataloging every slight, every memory that had led me here. At first the thoughts were scattered, anger, disbelief, fear, but slowly they braided into something sharper, more precise. I wasn't just hurt anymore. I was awake. Anger turned into focus, and focus demanded a plan. If they had chosen a party over my life, then I would choose my path forward. I would not allow them to write the final chapter of my story. The first step was information. I needed to know what people thought of me, what they had been saying, and how deep my parents' indifference ran. I started small, listening to overheard conversations in the corridor, noting how relatives spoke about me in the waiting room, the glances when my name came up. Each snippet became a piece of a puzzle. I learned who called, who canceled, who never visited. Those details sketched a pattern I could use. Once I had the pattern, I sought motive. Why would they choose a celebration over my survival? Was it ignorance, selfishness, or a habit of valuing charm over consistency? I replayed dinners, graduations, and quiet family moments, searching for answers. I remembered my scholarship letter met with a nod while Ryan's smallest wins earned exaggerated praise. The pattern suggested a hierarchy of preference, one I could exploit. Research turned into strategy. I mapped interactions and habits, who answered calls, which relatives attended Ryan's events, where his friends gathered. I kept notes, dates, messages, tiny details that would matter later. My scribbles began emotional, then steadied into method. I treated the plan like work. Gather facts, verify, then act. Observation became practice. I watched old videos and photos, noticing how I was cropped out or framed in the background. I traced conversational rhythms in family footage, catching the offhand compliments my parents habitually gave Ryan. I learned Ryan's haunts: a cafe, a bar, a friend's apartment where he felt untouchable. Those places and patterns would be useful windows into their world. Emotional preparation mattered as much as practical steps. Revenge could easily become hollow if it consumed me. I thought through consequences. What would success feel like? Would exposure heal me or leave a hollow win? I wanted them to feel the cost of their choices, but I also didn't want to lose myself in vengeance. So I set rules. No public spectacle without proof, no lies, and no actions that would make me someone I couldn't respect. I rehearsed my composure. I rehearsed conversations in my head, confrontations with my parents where I remained calm, precise, and unyielding. I imagined telling relatives the truth, laying out the pattern of favoritism with evidence rather than accusation. I wrote down questions I would ask, the facts I would present, the photos I would show. I pictured myself holding my head high, my voice steady, as I named each instance of neglect. There was a fierce satisfaction in imagining that moment, not the spectacle, but the undeniable clearing of the air. At the same time, I embraced subtlety. Brash moves would make me reckless. Subtlety would make me effective. I learned the language of hints: a carefully timed text, a photograph shown to the right person, a whispered truth overheard at the dinner table. Small exposures could grow into larger consequences. For example, a late-night message to an aunt about my parents' absence, phrased gently but firmly, could seed doubt. An old letter I'd kept, praise my father had given to Ryan, could be shared to illustrate a pattern. The aim was to let others reach the conclusion on their own. I prepared for resistance. Nothing in life aligns neatly, and families are messy. I expected denials, gaslighting, and the inevitable defenders who would paint me as dramatic or ungrateful. So I made contingency plans, trusted friends who could corroborate my versions of events, copies of messages, timestamps of calls, and photographs of empty hospital chairs. I reached out to a therapist, not to plot vengeance, but to steady myself, to ensure I stayed anchored to who I wanted to be. Their voice on the bad nights reminded me why I was doing this. Not for cruelty, but for recognition and respect. Practical steps followed. I created accounts under controlled privacy settings to monitor public posts. I started keeping a detailed journal of interactions and dates. I learned how to request call logs and appointment records if needed. Every new piece of information was a potential lever. I imagined presenting the evidence not as a dramatic accusation, but as a meticulous report: dates, times, witnesses, and the emotional cost. The plan felt almost clinical in its structure, and that clarity steadied me. There was also a quieter part of the plan, one that had nothing to do with exposing or punishing: rebuilding myself. I vowed to reclaim small joys, writing again, connecting with friends who mattered, and reclaiming spaces where I had once been erased. It was important that the revenge not be hollow. I wanted my life to expand into the space they had taken. Success, in my mind, would mean both exposure and renewal. Them facing the truth, and me stepping into a life that no longer required their approval. I thought about escalation. What if relatives defended my parents, or Ryan doubled down on charm? I would stay factual and calm, present a timeline that left no room for deniability. I practiced phrases that cut through excuses. You left me when doctors warned it was critical, and tell me where my life ranked above convenience. These were not for cruelty. They were for truth. I chose indirect pressure over spectacle. My parents loved reputation. I could influence private conversations. A message to my grandfather, a man who valued principle, might seed doubt. A mention to a cousin who organized family events could make timing a topic. Small ripples could change how my family framed the night. Technology became evidence. I backed up photos, saved messages, and recorded call logs. Appointment dates from the hospital and timestamps of missed calls became facts. I organized everything in folders: dates, witness names, screenshots, so emotion could not be mistaken for fabrication. Practical checkpoints kept me anchored. I needed to recover enough to speak clearly and gather witnesses who would corroborate. I set goals: a full list of calls, 3 independent witnesses, and proof of empty waiting chairs. When these were in place, confrontation would read like a compiled case, not a bitter accusation. I worried about revenge consuming me. To prevent that, I kept small pleasures: writing drafts, reconnecting with friends, and walks. The plan had to coexist with my life, otherwise it would hollow me. I vowed to pursue accountability and my own rebuilding at the same time. Allies emerged quietly. A nurse from the night confirmed the empty chairs. A friend revealed they'd offered to come, but were told my condition was stable, a phrase used to discourage visitors. Those confirmations were lanterns in the dark, guiding steps. Weeks of recovery became weeks of work. The plan was methodical: gather facts, nudge perceptions, and rebuild my life. I would not wait to be defined by their absence. I had evidence, witnesses, and the will to move. The only question left was sharper than any spreadsheet or photograph. Did I have the courage to follow through? I had a plan, but could I see it through? I thought I had accounted for everything. I had evidence, witnesses, and a plan that felt precise, almost unbreakable. But life and family have a way of twisting certainty into chaos. The first obstacle came quietly, almost innocuously. A friend I had confided in, someone I trusted to corroborate small details, miscommunicated a crucial piece of information. A simple mistake, yet it rippled into potential disaster. The timeline I had meticulously built suddenly had a glaring hole. My heart sank as I realized how fragile my plan truly was. Then came the first moral dilemma. I discovered an old letter from my mother, praising Ryan while dismissing me. I had planned to use it as proof, to show the pattern of favoritism. But when I held it in my hands, a wave of hesitation washed over me. Did I want this confrontation to be purely accusatory, or did I want them to feel the weight of their choices without cruel theatrics? I hesitated, torn between exacting a calculated emotional strike and maintaining my own integrity. That indecision slowed my progress and planted doubt in my mind. Could I execute this without losing myself in the process? The next setback struck harder. I realized my parents were far more aware than I had assumed. Subtle comments over the phone, offhand questions, and a sharpness in their tone suggested that they had sensed my intentions. My father, ever the manipulator, had begun planting seeds to undermine my credibility before I even acted. My mother, skilled in diversion, started emphasizing Ryan's needs and subtly shifting the family narrative. I felt a growing tension. Every move I made now risked being anticipated, every step tracked, every intention countered. A critical near-failure arrived in the form of hospital documentation. A nurse, misinterpreting my instructions, almost deleted a key piece of proof, a log confirming my parents' absence during the critical night. My pulse quickened as I imagined the consequences. Months of planning, emotional preparation, and careful gathering of evidence could vanish in a single misstep. I had to intervene immediately, navigating hospital bureaucracy I barely understood, all while my body was still weak and recovering. And then there was Ryan, blissfully unaware, or perhaps cunningly aware, of the storm brewing. He continued his life as if nothing had changed, confident that charm could shield him from accountability. Every interaction with him tested my patience. He would smile, drop casual remarks, or act entirely innocent while I gathered information behind the scenes. I had to maintain composure, restrain my anger, and not give him a glimpse of what I was planning. One wrong expression could ruin everything. Emotional strain compounded each obstacle. Weeks of planning, careful observation, and subtle maneuvering had left me both exhausted and hyper-aware. Every small hiccup now felt monumental. I began questioning myself. Was I too emotionally involved to act rationally? Could the desire for justice become an emotional trap, leading me to miscalculate in ways that would undo everything? The stakes felt impossibly high. A single mistake could destroy months of effort. Unexpected twists kept coming. One relative, who I thought would be neutral, became a vocal defender of my parents, painting me as dramatic or ungrateful. Another, unknowingly, share misleading information about my whereabouts during critical events, creating confusion in my timeline. Each twist forced me to rethink strategies, to rebuild contingencies, and to anticipate reactions I had never considered. Every step forward now required double the caution, double the calculation. A particularly cruel twist struck when I discovered a minor betrayal from someone I had considered an ally. A friend, perhaps swayed by loyalty to my parents, had whispered doubts about my intentions to a cousin who could influence family perception. I felt rage, betrayal, and despair collide in my chest. Trust had become dangerous, alliances fragile. Every relationship had to be re-examined, every piece of information verified independently. I could no longer rely on anyone implicitly. Every step forward required vigilance. Despite these obstacles, I noticed the antagonist's unawareness in some areas. My parents remained blind to certain tactics I had implemented, unaware that I was quietly documenting interactions and recording subtle manipulations. Their overconfidence, their assumption that I was powerless, became both a shield and a weapon for me. I had to use it carefully, exploiting their complacency while navigating setbacks that threatened to dismantle my progress. Each complication deepened my resolve, but also my anxiety. I began to realize that revenge was not a linear path. It demanded patience, resilience, and flexibility. Missteps were inevitable, betrayal by allies was possible, unexpected twists would continue. And yet, the core of my purpose, exposing favoritism, reclaiming agency, and holding them accountable, remained intact. The challenge was executing it despite the chaos that threatened to engulf me. The tension grew palpable. I spent nights replaying scenarios, imagining every possible counter from my parents or Ryan. I weighed moral choices, considered consequences, and recalibrated the sequence of actions. Every decision carried weight. Every hesitation could cost me control. The plan that had seemed almost infallible now required constant vigilance, strategic patience, and careful emotional regulation. And yet, through every misstep and setback, the fire inside me continued to burn. The sense of injustice, the sting of betrayal, the years of neglect, they were all fuel. Each obstacle became a test, a challenge that would determine whether I could execute the plan with precision and integrity. I had to keep moving forward, recalculating and refining with every twist. But the pressure was mounting. Documents almost lost, allies wavering, relatives interfering, parents beginning to sense my intent. It was too much to ignore. I knew the risk of failure had never been higher. And in the quiet moments, staring at the rain streaking the windows and listening to the distant hum of the city, a thought echoed in my mind, chilling and relentless. Everything I worked for, could it all be ruined? The night I had waited for arrived with a storm that seemed almost sentient, thrashing against the windows as though it knew the storm inside me mirrored the chaos outside. I stood in the dimly lit living room, the same room that had hosted countless celebrations for Ryan, the same room where my parents had chosen parties over me. The air was thick with tension, every shadow elongated by flickering candlelight, every gust of wind rattling the panes like a warning drumbeat. I could hear the faint laughter of Ryan in the next room, oblivious, confident that life would always bend in his favor. My parents, Thomas and Margaret, were gathered around him, smiling and exchanging compliments, completely unaware of the storm that had been quietly brewing in the shadows. For years, I had been quiet, patient, meticulous. Every observation, every note, every piece of evidence had led to this moment. And now, standing at the edge of confrontation, I felt the culmination of years of neglect, favoritism, and betrayal pressing down like the storm outside. I stepped forward, my presence unnoticed at first, and felt a surge of adrenaline. This was not just about revenge. It was about visibility, about reclaiming the voice and agency I had been denied for decades. I could feel my heart pounding, not with fear, but with a fierce, unrelenting focus. The storm raged harder, the thunder shaking the walls, as if the universe itself had come to witness this reckoning. Emily. My father's voice cracked slightly when he finally saw me, a flicker of surprise and unease crossing his face. My mother turned, her smile faltering, replaced with an expression I had seen only in fleeting moments of confrontation when she realized she was caught. Ryan's eyes widened, innocence feigned, but I knew him well enough to see the edge of fear creeping in. I held up my evidence folder, a collection of screenshots, messages, appointment logs, photographs, and notes, each piece a testament to their neglect and favoritism. The paper shook slightly in my hands, but my voice did not. "I want you to see the truth," I said, my tone calm, yet edged with a fire that had been building for years. "Not excuses, not justifications, not the versions you told yourselves. This is exactly what happened." They exchanged glances, the first crack in their polished facades. My father's jaw tightened, my mother's hands fluttered nervously, and Ryan fidgeted, the confident mask slipping for a moment. I laid out each instance meticulously, the moments that had built the pattern of favoritism, neglect, and, ultimately, abandonment. Each photograph, each call log, each time-stamped message became a hammer striking at the illusion they had maintained for so long. "You left me in the ICU," I said, letting the words hang in the air. "You chose a party over my life. Do you understand what that means?" My voice was steady, but my chest tightened with the memory of alarms, the beeping machines, the sterile smell of the hospital. The words pierced through the room, and for the first time, I saw them as I had seen them for years, not as loving parents, but as flawed, fallible humans, capable of cruelty and indifference. Ryan opened his mouth to speak, to dismiss, to charm, but I cut him off with a glance that froze him in place. "You were 9 years younger, and you always got away with everything. But this is not about age. This is about choice. Every smile, every excuse, every defense you thought would protect you, it ends tonight." I could see the weight of realization settle over them. For once, charm, excuses, and manipulation were powerless. The storm outside seemed to echo my heartbeat as I continued, my narration fluid, interwoven with pointed evidence and emotional truths. I recounted the school recitals, the birthdays ignored, the dinners where my successes were minimized. I held nothing back, allowing every detail, every slight, every moment of neglect to hang in the air. Their faces shifted from surprise to discomfort, then to guilt. The room was silent, save for the wind rattling against the windows, a mirror to the tension I felt inside. At one point, my father attempted to interject, his voice trembling. "Emily, you're being dramatic," he said, but the words lacked conviction. I looked directly at him, unwavering. "Dramatic? I was fighting for my life while you celebrated another's happiness. This is reality, not drama. And now you have to see it." My mother's hands clenched, the gentle composure she usually wore fractured into panic. "We didn't mean," she began, but I cut her off with a single, precise sentence. "Intent doesn't erase impact. Your choices abandoned me when I needed you most. Do you understand?" The evidence, the quiet accumulation of truth, was undeniable. Even Ryan, who had always relied on charm and deflection, could not deflect the cold weight of what I presented. He slouched slightly, attempting to hide, but his eyes betrayed the shock and guilt he could not yet name. The room was a battlefield of silence, tension thick enough to feel in my chest. Every second passed like an eternity, each moment stretching, waiting for the reaction that would seal the confrontation. And then came the climax of my strategy, the reveal that tied the past to the present. I pulled out the hospital logs, the time-stamped call records, the messages from nurses confirming their absence. I laid them gently on the table. "These are not stories. These are facts. Your absence has consequences, and now, finally, you face them." My father's face drained of color. My mother's eyes widened, and Ryan's confident facade cracked entirely. The storm outside reached its crescendo, rain pelting the windows, thunder roaring as if echoing the confrontation. In that moment, I felt a strange mixture of triumph and exhaustion, a catharsis that had been years in the making. My words, my evidence, my strategy, they had worked. They could no longer deny, ignore, or manipulate the narrative. I stepped back, letting the tension settle like dust after an explosion. I saw their faces, stripped of pretense, and I felt the gravity of what I had achieved. Not vindictiveness, not cruelty, but acknowledgement. For years, I had been overlooked, underestimated, erased. Now I stood visible, undeniable, and unbroken. And yet, even as relief mingled with satisfaction, there was lingering tension. The storm outside began to wane, but the room remained charged, heavy with emotion. I had exposed the truth, confronted betrayal, and reclaimed my voice, but the aftermath was uncertain. How they would process it, how they would change, or whether they could repair the fractured bonds, these were unknowns. The confrontation had succeeded, but the story was not fully resolved. I allowed myself a small, private moment of reflection. The fire inside me had burned bright, fueled by years of neglect, favoritism, and betrayal. The confrontation had not been easy. It had demanded patience, courage, and meticulous planning. And yet, it had delivered something more powerful than I had anticipated: clarity, agency, and a sense of justice that was both personal and unassailable. I looked at them one last time, their faces pale and speechless, and thought of the countless moments that had led to this crescendo. Every slight, every overlooked achievement, every moment of abandonment, they had brought me here, to this stormy night, to this room filled with truth. And as I stepped away from the table, the evidence still laid out like a testament, I realized that the climax was not just about revenge. It was about reclaiming myself, my narrative, and my place in the world. Outside, the storm began to dissipate, leaving a cleansed, if uneasy, quiet. Inside, the echoes of confrontation lingered, a mixture of anger, regret, and the strange, liberating relief of having been seen, finally, in all the ways I deserved. I had faced betrayal, orchestrated justice, and emerged both victorious and cautious, knowing that the repercussions of this night would unfold in their own time. And as I left the room, the rain tapping softly against the windows, I felt the tension of the moment settle like a pulse, steady and insistent. The confrontation had delivered its catharsis, but the story, the healing, and the full reckoning had only just begun. I had claimed my voice, but the shadows of betrayal would not vanish entirely. And in that lingering uncertainty, I knew one truth more than any other. I had survived, I had fought, and I was no longer powerless. The first light of dawn crept through the hospital blinds, spilling soft gold across the empty room where I had fought, planned, and confronted. The machines that had once marked my fragile heartbeat now sat quietly, their beeps replaced by silence. The storm had passed, leaving streets slick with rain, the city hushed in reflection. I sat up slowly, letting the morning warmth wash over me, and felt something I hadn't expected, a profound, almost dizzying sense of calm. It was not relief alone, nor was it triumph. It was understanding. The confrontation, the meticulous planning, the emotional energy spent, it had changed me. I no longer felt the paralyzing anger that had consumed me in the hospital bed, nor the hollow ache of abandonment. Instead, I felt clarity. The path I had walked through betrayal, strategy, and exposure had led me not only to justice, but also to the realization that I was capable of commanding my own life, regardless of who chose to support or abandon me. I wandered slowly to the window, watching rain-streaked streets glint in the first morning light. The world outside moved on, oblivious to the intimate storm I had endured. But for me, everything had shifted. I thought of my parents, their faces pale and uncertain, confronting the undeniable truth I had laid before them. Their reactions had ranged from shock to guilt, yet their eventual acknowledgement of wrongdoing mattered less than the act itself. It was proof that power could be reclaimed, not with violence, but with precision, patience, and unwavering resolve. The aftermath was not without complexity. Conversations in the following days were awkward, charged with the weight of exposure. My parents tried to apologize, stumbling over words that now felt inadequate. Ryan avoided direct eye contact, His usual charm diminished, replaced with an unspoken acknowledgement of accountability. Each interaction was a reminder that actions have consequences and that truth, once revealed, cannot be hidden. For the first time, I experienced the tangible result of years of silent endurance. They were forced to recognize me, to see me as more than an afterthought, more than the overlooked sibling. I spent hours reflecting on the emotional cost. Revenge, even executed with care, carries weight. There were moments of guilt, fleeting pangs at the thought of how my parents might have internalized my confrontation. Could the same outcome have been achieved with less confrontation, with gentler measures? I considered the countless nights I had spent strategizing, the sleepless hours, the meticulous gathering of evidence. Each step had demanded vigilance and emotional stamina. And yet, in the quiet of the dawn, I realized that these sacrifices had been necessary, not to harm, but to reclaim my narrative. Walking through the hospital halls one last time, I noticed the emptiness. The rooms that had once held alarms, monitors, and the sterile scent of illness now seemed like relics of a trial endured and survived. I paused in the hall outside my room, tracing the floor tiles with my gaze, and let myself absorb the symbolism. I had been vulnerable, overlooked, and powerless, yet I had emerged resilient. The physical and emotional landscape of the hospital mirrored the internal transformation. Spaces once oppressive, now quiet, once threatening, now reclaimed. Returning to my apartment later that day, I noticed how ordinary life felt extraordinary. The rain had stopped, leaving streets glistening in soft sunlight. Birds called in the distance, cars moved quietly along wet asphalt, and the city seemed to breathe in gentle rhythm. I poured myself a cup of tea, savoring the warmth, the silence, and the small victories that no one else could see. The confrontation had changed not just my family but me. I was no longer waiting for validation. I had created it through action, clarity, and unwavering commitment to my own sense of justice. I reflected on the subtle yet profound shifts in myself. Anger remained, but it had been refined into purpose rather than destruction. The betrayal that once threatened to define my life had become a catalyst for growth. I recognized patterns in my past, favoritism, neglect, manipulation, and instead of being shackled by them, I now saw them as lessons. I had learned to observe, to act, and to assert my worth with precision. I realized that revenge had been a tool, not the end, a way to reclaim agency rather than merely punish. In the days that followed, my interactions with my family grew tentative but real. There was a new respect, a tempered understanding, even if lingering tension remained. I noticed my parents listening more carefully, choosing words with thought, acknowledging my presence in ways that had once seemed impossible. Ryan, too, adjusted, no longer relying on effortless charm to navigate our relationship. While trust could not be instantly restored, recognition and accountability had been achieved, and that was enough to mark a turning point. I also allowed myself to imagine a future unburdened by their choices. I began planning steps for personal growth, career goals, friendships, self-care that were not dependent on approval or validation. The confrontation had opened space for autonomy. I could finally define my life on my terms, informed by past lessons but not constrained by them. I felt a quiet pride, the kind that comes from having endured, calculated, and acted without compromise. Yet, even in this calm, reflective state, I could not ignore the cost. The emotional energy spent, the fear of missteps, the moral dilemmas, the sleepless nights, they had all left traces. I acknowledged them honestly, accepting that growth often carries shadows alongside light. I had gained justice and agency, but I had also learned the limits of patience, trust, and forgiveness. The night of confrontation remained vivid in my memory, a storm forever etched into my psyche as a reminder of what had been endured and what had been reclaimed. Finally, as I watched the sun rise over the quiet city, painting the streets gold, I asked myself the question that lingered at the edge of every reflection. Would I have done the same if I had known the cost? The answer was complex, layered with pain, triumph, and clarity. Yes, I would. Every sleepless night, every careful calculation, every emotional risk had led me here, to a place where I could stand tall, unshaken, and fully present in my own life. I had reclaimed my voice, my power, and my dignity. I had survived betrayal and transformed it into a force for clarity, justice, and self-realization. The storm had passed. The confrontation was over. And I finally could breathe. Looking back, I realized that the story of my life, at least up to that stormy night, was defined by choices, both mine and theirs. Choices that seemed small at the time, like missing a call or prioritizing one celebration over another, had consequences that rippled far beyond the moment. My parents' decision to attend Ryan's party while I lay in the ICU was a single act, yet it encapsulated a pattern of favoritism and neglect that had quietly shaped my existence. That night taught me a painful, yet invaluable lesson. The people we expect to protect us are not infallible, and sometimes we must find strength where we once sought comfort. Betrayal, I learned, is not just an act, it is a mirror. It reflects not only the failings of others, but also the space within ourselves where we allow neglect, favoritism, or injustice to take root. For years, I had tolerated subtle dismissals, quiet comparisons, and small acts of indifference, rationalizing them, hoping love or loyalty would fill the gaps. But the truth is, no amount of hope can replace acknowledgement and accountability. Confrontation, no matter how daunting, is sometimes the only path to reclaiming agency. That is the heart of resilience, recognizing the betrayal, feeling the pain, and choosing to act not from despair, but from purpose. Justice, I discovered, is multifaceted. It is not necessarily about punishment, spectacle, or dramatic revenge. True justice is about clarity, exposure, and recognition. It is about showing the patterns, revealing truths that have been ignored, and reclaiming dignity for oneself. When I presented the evidence to my parents and Ryan, it was not about shaming them for the sake of cruelty. It was about holding them accountable in a way that could no longer be dismissed. Justice, I realized, is about restoring balance even when the world has been unfair. But perhaps the most profound lesson is the power of self-worth. No one else's choices can define our value. For too long, I allowed my parents' favoritism to make me question my place in the world, my achievements, and even my right to be heard. That narrative could have stayed with me indefinitely had I not chosen to confront it, document it, and reclaim it. True empowerment comes not from others' recognition, but from internal acknowledgement. The courage to see oneself clearly, the confidence to act with integrity, and the strength to insist on being treated fairly. The cost of betrayal, however, is unavoidable. It leaves scars, both visible and invisible. It demands emotional labor, careful strategy, and moments of reckoning we would rather avoid. My nights of planning, researching, and rehearsing were exhausting, but they were necessary. Every setback, every misstep, every tense confrontation sharpened me, teaching patience, caution, and the importance of foresight. Betrayal may wound us, but it also has the potential to ignite self-discovery, resilience, and a deeper understanding of human behavior. Resilience, in my story, was not born in comfort. It was forged in adversity. I had to navigate disappointment, emotional manipulation, and near failures to reach clarity. The stormy nights, the isolation, the sleepless hours, each tested my resolve and honed my focus. And when the confrontation finally arrived, it was not just the culmination of revenge, but the affirmation of a self I had nurtured in private, capable, strategic, and unyielding. Resilience is about endurance, but also about transformation, turning betrayal into a catalyst for growth. There is also a caution embedded in this reflection. Revenge, while satisfying in moments of exposure, carries weight. It must be measured, purposeful, and aligned with one's principles. Acting rashly or vindicatively can hollow the outcome, leaving emptiness instead of closure. My strategy worked because it was thoughtful, precise, and guided by a desire for justice rather than malice. The audience should remember that accountability does not require cruelty. It requires clarity, courage, and the willingness to face difficult truths head-on. Finally, this story is a mirror for anyone watching. It asks us to reflect on the relationships we inhabit, the trust we extend, and the choices we allow others to make on our behalf. How often do we tolerate patterns of favoritism, neglect, or betrayal, hoping they will resolve themselves? How often do we sacrifice our own voice, fearing confrontation or conflict? And most importantly, what would happen if we finally chose to stand, speak, and reclaim what is rightfully ours? These are questions I continue to carry, and I offer them as both warning and guidance. The journey from betrayal to empowerment is rarely straightforward. It is filled with obstacles, moral dilemmas, and emotional turbulence. But it also reveals the human capacity for resilience, clarity, and self-worth. My parents' choice to attend Ryan's party over my life could have defined me with pain and resentment forever, but instead, I allowed it to catalyze action, reflection, and growth. In the end, the lesson is simple yet profound. Recognize betrayal, reclaim agency, and honor your own value. That is where true justice lies. And so, as I step into the quiet streets after the storm, the city bathed in the gentle glow of morning, I carry this lesson with me. No one can define your worth, no one can erase your voice, and the power to reclaim your life has always been yours. The storm may come, betrayal may wound, but resilience, courage, and clarity will always remain within reach. As the city awakens from the storm, and the golden light filters through rain-streaked windows, I pause to reflect on the journey that brought me here. From the ICU bed where my life hung in the balance, to the long nights of strategizing and gathering evidence, to the confrontation that finally laid bare years of favoritism, neglect, and betrayal, it has been a path marked by pain, resilience, and ultimately, self-empowerment. Every emotion I felt, fear, anger, despair, determination, was a step toward reclaiming my voice, my agency, and my place in the world. This story is more than just revenge. It is a testament to the human spirit. It is about recognizing betrayal, confronting uncomfortable truths, and finding strength within yourself when those who should protect you fail. My journey reminds us that we are capable of standing up for ourselves, demanding acknowledgement, and taking control of our narrative. The cost is never negligible, and the path is never easy, but the rewards, in clarity and self-worth, are undeniable. If my story resonated with you, and you've ever faced injustice, favoritism, or neglect in your own life, I invite you to reflect. How would you reclaim your voice if the people around you failed to see your worth? And for those watching, let this be a reminder. Strength is cultivated in adversity, and empowerment comes from deliberate action, not passive suffering. If you want to continue exploring stories like mine, filled with betrayal, suspense, and dramatic confrontations, make sure to like this video, comment your thoughts below, and subscribe for more intense revenge stories. Share your reflections, your moments of resilience, or even your own stories of confronting betrayal. Every story matters, and every voice deserves to be heard. For the thumbnail, imagine a cinematic depiction that captures the emotional weight of the story. I lie on the hospital bed, shadows of my parents looming behind, the rain-streaked window framing the scene. Glowing monitors cast an eerie light across the room, while Ryan's blurred figure lingers in the background, a subtle yet menacing presence. This visual instantly conveys tension, betrayal, and the emotional stakes, drawing viewers into the story before they even click. It's the perfect snapshot of the struggle, the confrontation, and the lingering suspense that defines the narrative. And even as this chapter closes, a question lingers, one that keeps the story alive and the suspense taut. What will happen next? How will the aftermath of exposure and confrontation ripple through our lives, our relationships, and our choices? That uncertainty, that lingering tension, is the essence of dramatic storytelling, leaving viewers eager for the next installment. So, take a moment to reflect, engage, and join me in this journey. The storm has passed, but the echoes of betrayal, resilience, and justice remain, waiting for those who dare to stand, act, and reclaim what is theirs. Like, comment, and subscribe. And be ready for the next story, where emotions run high, stakes are intense, and every betrayal holds a lesson waiting to be revealed.